It's not Christmas, it's not New Year's, no one knows what day of the week it is, and the question that's on everyone's lips is there any more cheese? Welcome to Twixtmas. Hello Pickles and welcome to episode 13 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. If this is your first time joining us here in the podcast, hello and welcome to you. A brief word of warning to let you know that this is a swearing friendly podcast and therefore the language is wont to get a little colourful. However, for those of you who are joining, who are old hands at this sort of thing, who have been here for some, many, all perhaps, of the podcasts that I have put out here previously, a massive hello and welcome back to you. Happy holidays to those of you who celebrate. To those of you who don't, a welcome break from an otherwise mundane and perhaps slightly quieter than usual week. I hope you're all well. We're having a slightly quieter week over here at Knitting Vicariously. It is a wonderful time of the year. It's that glorious few days in between Christmas and New Year where no one knows what the hell is going on. It's what I like to refer to as the forgotten days of Twixtmas, which is, it's almost like a song, where you would find, you know, kind of everyone's very relaxed. You're maybe seeing some people, you might be doing a little bit of kind of Christmas shopping, but essentially it's a very kind of hedonistic and indulgent last few days of the year before you crack down and all of the diet shaming begins of 2019 and the New Year period. So that's the delight that we all have to look forward to. None of us are going to be good enough, none of us are going to be slim enough, but hey, at least we have the last few days of the year to stuff our faces and to enjoy just a little bit of laid back chill time with friends, with family, with telly and with knitting. What more could you possibly ask for? I am also enjoying a little bit of downtime as well off the back of a very hectic December to date on the basis that I was taking part in Vlogmas. For those of you who are unaware, for whom Vlogmas completely passed you by, Vlogmas is a challenge that's generally posed to those in the kind of YouTube podcasting vlogging community that encourages you to post regular updates throughout Advent leading up to Christmas itself, and just encouraging you to share a little bit of what you're doing as part of that general festive period. I took part in the challenge rather foolhardily, shall we say, on the basis that I've only been podcasting for a couple of months and decided to really throw myself into it with my trademark wild abandon, if you like, and yeah, it was an awful lot of fun. I am conscious that not everyone really kind of is that engaged or cares too much about Vlogmas, which I wholeheartedly understand, particularly when people are posting daily updates, particularly when a lot of podcasts that you follow are posting daily updates. It can get very overwhelming very quickly. I do understand where you're coming from on that. I very much entered into it in the spirit of wanting to learn a little bit more, wanting to get better at editing, particularly editing things that aren't just purely my face in this format, and to that extent I think it really helped me deliver some slightly different content. And I know the feedback and some of the comments that I received, and if you were one of those who gave me those, thank you so much. They were hugely appreciated. I didn't have time to respond as everything was kind of moving so quickly on a daily basis in the way that I would have liked to, but please know they were very much appreciated, and I'm delighted that those of you who followed along enjoyed it. In particular, I know that there were a few who really enjoyed the penultimate day of Vlogmas, where I shared my rather sweary, non-traditional rendition of a timeless classic, The Night Before Stitchmas, as I called it. And for those of you who'd asked questions about it, yes, it's something that I wrote. I wrote it a few years ago, and I decided that I would bring it to life as part of Vlogmas as best I could. So yes, to those of you who really enjoyed it, thank you so much. I had an awful lot of fun in putting it together. As we approach the last few days of 2018, that means the deadline for the Knitter of the Year awards is also almost upon us. As I've mentioned in previous weeks, this is the Knit Now Awards in a number of different categories, including the category of online innovation, in which Knitting Vicariously has been nominated. Thank you so kindly to those of you who have nominated or who have voted for me already. I really appreciate it, and I'm just generally flabbergasted to be in this group in the first place. You do still have a few days remaining. I will put a link in the show notes below, and a quick reminder that as well as a number of different UK-based podcasts and blogs that are already nominated, you can of course enter in your own favourites in a free text field as well. So do feel free to give shout outs and general kind of good vibes and well wishes to those podcasts that you do really enjoy that are UK based, because I'm sure each and every one of us will very much appreciate it. Talking about the end of this year and into next, a quick reminder that next week's podcast will also be up a little bit out of schedule. So previously I've been uploading at the start of the week. Both this time and next week's podcasts are going to be up towards the end of the week, coming up to the weekend. And then the schedule is going to be a little bit uncertain over the rest of January because, as I mentioned, I'm going to be starting a new contract with work, and that is going to take a little bit of time away, both from my general podcasting time as well as my knitting time. And so you'll forgive me if it takes me a little bit of time just to get up and running with that. I have said that I'm looking to podcast every other week in January. So with that in mind, given there's next week's podcast that will be posted, I'm intending to have one up around about the middle of the month, so towards the end of that week, and then another around the end of the CAL, which obviously finishes on the 31st of January. And on the subject of the CAL, there is still plenty of time remaining. So for those of you who have finally got the last of those gift knits out the door and are just desperate to cast on something wildly hedonistic for yourselves, feel free to do so, and feel free to blame me for it. I am at your disposal. So yes, for those of you who have been waiting for the moment to cast on, I'm delighted to say that you're more than welcome still to join us. You have plenty of time. Don't feel compelled that you have to get things finished. Finishing your objects is only one of 3 ways in which you can win a prize as part of the giveaway, but really a key part of it is just having the chance to cast on something that you've been lusting after for a really long time. And a very quick reminder that you can win a prize in one of 3 ways. So the first of those 2 are both over on Ravelry, in the Knitting Vicariously group on Ravelry, which you can find by searching for Knitting Vicariously in the Groups tab. And once over there, you will see a chatter group. By chattering in the chatter group, you become eligible for one of those prizes. And for each and every post, you have an entry. So in a sense, the chattier and more engaged you are, whilst keeping it on topic, of course, the better. And so you will be able to win. I will choose a post at random using random number generator by looking through the chatter thread there. You can also enter by entering a finished object in the finished objects thread, also on Ravelry, and a reminder as well that it is a 1 post per person thread. And so unlike the chatter thread, when you can post as many times as you like, in the FO thread it's 1 post, and for each and every FO that you have, should you be lucky and timely enough to have more than 1, you will add those to your original post and therefore be eligible for a prize. And the third prize is via Instagram. So by using the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG hashtag, which I will put on the screen here, you will be able to become eligible with that post for the prize. And again, you can use that hashtag as many times as you choose. Again, as ever, please do ensure that you're keeping it on topic and that you're attaching it to the projects that you're using to knit on as part of the CAL itself. But other than that, it's very straightforward. It is knitting, crocheting, it's weaving, it's essentially working with yarn in any way on any project that you really so desire. And as long as it's something you really want, to misquote the Spice Girls, then you are more than welcome to blame me for casting it on and working on it during this CAL. The format of this week's podcast will be a little bit different from normal. I'm going to take you through my what I'm wearing, which also happens to coincide with my FO section this week. And then we'll have a look at some whips, including a couple of new cast-ons, before I move into the Vicarious knitting section of the podcast. My Vicarious knitting this week is going to be a little bit different. I'll take a look back at some of the things that have come up in 2018, as well as looking forward to 2019 and my plans for that, before finally we have a look at some of your knit-along projects this week from the Ravelry groups. Show notes, as ever, can be found in the description box below, as well as over on Ravelry in the Knitting Vicariously group. I will also, as ever, have an episode post up on Instagram on the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account. Again, for those of you who are unaware, I have two Instagram accounts. I have dunderknit, which is my personal account, and then the Knitting Vicariously account, which I use to post show notes over on Instagram, so you can follow any makers, any hashtags that are relevant and mentioned as part of the episode. But without any further ado, let's make a start on what I'm wearing, which also, as I mentioned, happens to coincide with my finished objects section this week, because what I'm wearing is my newly finished fern and feather sweater. Yes, it is done. It is done. And I love it. I absolutely love it. This is, it's perfect, and I'm gonna gush at you a little bit about this, but I say it's perfect. It's pretty bloody good, if I do say so myself. But yes, this is a pattern by the inimitable Jennifer Steingass, who is Knit Love Wool over on Instagram. It is the fern and feather sweater. It is a sweater that many people have knitted, including a number of different podcasts, and it only really came to my attention when my friend Meredith knit hers in the colours and the yarn that I have exactly replicated right here. And so again, as ever, I take no responsibility, no accountability, no credit for any of this combination that's going on here. I literally copied my friend, but I'm very glad that I did. So let me stand up and I will show you this in its full glory. And so here you have the festive fern and feather boobs. Yay! As you will see, there is quite a bit of positive ease that's built into this jumper. I knit the size 49, which gives me a good 3 to 4 inches of positive ease here around my bust measurement. And certainly it sits and fits really nicely as the oversized sweater I was hoping for. In terms of the general fit, the yoke of the sweater is quite deep. So what I would say is kind of here where I split for the sleeves, it's quite a bit lower than perhaps my actual sort of underarm, which is more closely up here. So there is quite a lot of kind of positive ease that's built into it. It may well be my gauge, but I think as a sweater it is designed to sit, the yoke of it is designed to sit a little bit further down, and so it's not going to be quite as close a fit up here as perhaps some other sweaters, and certainly some set-in sleeve sweaters that I've knit in the past. But on the whole, it just gives it a much more kind of relaxed and slightly more oversized fit. I'm conscious that I'm doing these bizarre movements now in front of the camera, which, yeah, I'm not entirely sure that it illustrates my point, but it helps me come up with it as I talk, so there we go. So yes, as you'll see sideways on, definitely a little bit oversized. I also mentioned as I was knitting it, there's quite a bit of short row shaping that's built into the back here underneath the yoke. So if I turn round, you may or may not be able to see that, but certainly it gives it a really nice overall fit, and yeah, I'm just really happy with it. As ever, let's go up on tiptoes, it comes to bang on my mid hip, so maybe even sort of slightly mid to low hip, let's call it that, but certainly kind of where I like my sweaters to fit. I don't like them to be too long. They tend to annoy me if I'm having to do things with them. Yep, words, good. And if they're too short and cropped, I just feel they look a slightly funny length on me. So this length here is pretty much bang on. And now I'm going to sit down and stop dancing around in front of the camera, because yeah, no one needs that. No one. Yes, sorry about that. Not totally sure what came over me. I'm really enjoying this sweater. It is, in terms of its general fit, as I've mentioned, it is a little bit looser and flowing. The arms are no exception, so they do come in sort of to quite a close fitting point, which is probably one of the main modifications, possibly the only modification I made with this sweater on the whole, which is to say that generally when it comes to arms I tend to just keep decreasing to the point where I am happy that they sit quite nicely in at my wrists, and then I tend to start the ribbing. I don't follow instructions absolutely to the letter. I do find that sometimes sleeves are written with a little bit more extra, how can I describe it, of a sort of an extra poofiness, if you like, around the sleeves, so they tend to be cinched in quite heavily at the wrist itself, and I tend to favour a more kind of tapered look myself, and so I do sort of get to a point where I kind of just ignore instructions on the sleeves and knit to the point and the width that I am happiest with, which is very much what I did here. So I think I decreased down to the point where there were around about 42 stitches left before I started the ribbing, and that seemed to work quite well. In both the body and the sleeves themselves, I used the Laurie's twisty bind off that I mentioned previously, and I would really recommend it as a stretchy bind off that is great for ribbing in particular. The yarn I used here is the Plucky Knitter in their Yak Paca base. It is a blend of yak and alpaca. It was purchased from the Plucky Reserve when they happened to have some in back in October during my trip to the US when I was over there for Rhinebeck. And in terms of the colourways, I have Pinstripe here, which is the darker grey, and Going Grey, which is, funnily enough, the lighter grey. And as I've mentioned in previous weeks, the colour combination, the pattern combination, and indeed the general inspiration behind the whole thing is my dear friend Meredith, who had knit this exact jumper in a different size, and I coveted constantly when we were over in the US. And so I say, if you can't beat them, at the very least, copy them, steal their ideas, pass them off as your own on your own podcast. That's what I say. But this is a really, really lovely yarn. I will say that in terms of the kind of general weight of it, it feels really quite light. This feels like a very lightweight, very warm sweater. It is lovely. It reminds me in terms of it, kind of the feel of it and the warmth of it, of my non-superwash jumpers, so like my Sundotier, my Stalactite for instance, both of which are knit with non-superwash yarns. It's got that similar kind of coziness to it that you don't necessarily always get from superwash wools, but at the same time, it's really lovely and lofty and quite lightweight, and certainly nowhere near as kind of constricting as some of the yarns that I've used in the past or some of the patterns that I've knit in the past, because it is a little bit oversized. That may also be due in part to the fact that it is, I believe, a woolen spun yarn. Certainly there are no kind of clear plies or clear definition to it in the way that you would expect from a worsted spun yarn, and it has a certain kind of loftiness to it and a certain kind of halo to it with a few little guard hairs and so on that makes it incredibly cozy. The guard hairs in particular do an excellent line in camouflaging cat hair, as I've mentioned in previous weeks, which is a key concern for me here on the basis that I have a cat and his hair just fluffy anyway. But yeah, it does a great line in camouflaging any and all indiscretions along those lines. And so yeah, I really, really like this, and on the basis that when I saw my friend Meredith wearing this, that it had stood up very, very well, it hadn't pilled much at all. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this yarn wears, and certainly for me it's not irritating me at all, it's not kind of agitating me. It does sit perhaps a little bit lower on the neck than some other sweaters that I've knit in the past, but at the same time I'm certainly not feeling any particular kind of itch or sort of prickle in at my princessy neck here. The neckline is maybe the one thing that I'm slightly unsure about with the sweater, and I'll move my hair so you can see. So it's quite a wide neckline. It is a little bit of a rolled neckline here. This is where you cast on, you then knit down. There's no stitches that are picked up and knit as part of this, which is the kind of traditional way that I've knit a lot of my top-down sweaters. And I think the wider neckline is the only thing that, as I say, I'm slightly uncertain about. With most other sweaters of this style, I would have picked up and knit a short collar, or maybe a sort of folded collar on here, and I'm still not 100% sure that I'm not going to do that. I do like the look of it, I really do. It's slightly wider and slightly more of a boat neck than some of the sweaters that I've knit. I'm just not entirely sure if I like it as much. Jury's out. I'm going to leave it and see kind of how I feel about it, but certainly for a sweater that's kind of big and oversized and cozy, that I sort of want it to be kind of in and or cozy at the neck as well, but I don't know, we'll see. I'll live with it for a bit and see how we go. So this is my fern and feather. I think in terms of yarn and yardage, I used just under, I think about half a skein for the contrast colour up here. I'll need to weigh it and double check, but certainly less than 5 skeins for the body of the sweater itself, and the yardage is pretty good. I think it's around 250 yards per skein on the Plucky Yakpaka. So all in all, yeah, pretty happy with the size and the fit and the general overallness of this sweater. And so we move along to works in progress. I have a couple of new cast-ons to share with you this week. There are some existing cast-ons that I've been working on, which include a little bit more work on my Widow's Kiss, but again, not quite enough to show you. And when I say a little bit more work, I mean maybe a couple of rows, really not enough yet. As well as my granny stripe blanket, which I've been working up using my Homespun House Advent minis from last year. That is beautifully colourful, and I will share you once all of those are up to date, because I'm still missing the last couple of days of Advent. But you know that thing of you finish a sweater, one sweater comes off the needles, another one has to go on, and it's the rule, it's just kind of how it goes. And what I will say is, for someone who clearly enjoys quite a bit of colour, and particularly if you watched the last couple of episodes of Vlogmas, I think 18, 19 thereabouts, Amy of the Stranded podcast was trying on some of the sweaters that I've knit in previous years, and that was so much fun. And you'll see that I have quite a wide-ranging colour palette in that I like all of them. I'm quite surprised in that I'm having a bit of a neutrals moment. It'll pass, don't worry. This is not going to be forlorn for long, I promise. But certainly at the moment, bit of a neutrals thing. Interesting. But here is my first work in progress. It's living in a brand new project bag. This is a project bucket bag by, it is Maika, M-A-I-K-A. This is a Christmas present that I received from my wonderful friend Max, who is Knit I Am over on Instagram, and it's delightfully generous, unnecessary, all of those things, very much not expected, but very much appreciated. And it's wonderful because it fits in a fabulous new project of mine, which is going to look rather dishevelled until I sort it out. But this is a new cast on from a publication I have already used and referred to in recent months for another project that I finished, which was my Stalactite. So this is another project from Lane Magazine issue 4, and it is the Lakeland pullover, and there is my fledgling version of it. Now, I'll put a picture of it up on the screen so you can see what it's going to look like in its finished kind of completionness. But this is a pattern by Fiona Alice. It's a gorgeous, oversized, lovely, cozy sweater. Can you see that I'm definitely in the mood for that at the moment? But yeah, it's really lovely textured front, and then the back is predominantly plain with a section of twisted stitches that go up the back. And yeah, it's a really lovely sweater. So it is knit bottom up. Let me hold it up so you can see. As I say, it looks slightly dishevelled at the moment based on how it is sitting on the needles, but you have a load of twisted rib to begin with here, and then a sort of textured panel here on the front, whereas the back is plain stockinette with this section of just the twisted rib that goes up the centre of the back. There is also a split hem, as you will see, so it's split in the centre back, and I will block it so it lies a little bit more closely together rather than this bizarre kind of bum gap that seems to be happening at the moment. It's not the look I'm going to be going for. As well as a split side seam here too, and so yeah, it's lovely and cozy and delightfully squishy. I am knitting this out of stash yarn. Ha! See? all those of you who are like, oh, you never use your stash. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. You will be forgiven for not having seen this before though, because it is one of the yarns that lives in the cubby holes that sit below. And I am knitting this up using Quince & Co. Lark in the Caspian colourway, which is this beautiful heathery kind of taupey beige colour. It's taupey beige, it's not brown. I was having a mild disagreement with some of the lovely people in my knit group who are adamant that I knit with brown and that I'm refusing to call it brown. This to me is not brown. This is very definitely a taupey beige colour, so no. But yeah, I'm really enjoying working up with this. Lark is a base that I've used before. I used it from my Nanilchik Swancho, which I knit in previous months. Back in February this year for the Ravelinics I used. But yeah, it's a beautiful base to work with. It's lovely and soft and squishy. It doesn't need to be alternated for the most part, which is a very, very good bit of news. I'm of course now doubtless going to need to find that I will need to alternate. I just said that. But no, for the colours that I have are all very consistent. They're all from the same dye lot. I should be fine. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely yarn and I really enjoy working with it. It is a bottom-up sweater, as is my Widow's Kiss. I've talked previously about how I can sometimes find bottom-up sweaters a little bit challenging because you need to put a lot of effort in to see anything by way of reward. I do have my little progress keeper here who's keeping me company, and as ever, this is a progress keeper from the wonderful Hannah at the Corner of Craft. I was lucky enough to pick up. Here we go. I was lucky enough to be able to pick this up as part of a Christmas update she was having. It's a little mug with a little snowman. It's particularly festive and wonderful, and I love it. So keeping track of my progress is definitely helping me see how far I'm getting, but I'm not under any illusions that this is definitely going to be a little bit of a slog, certainly until I get to the armpits, because yeah, no, that's not even going to cover the boob region. No, it needs to be a bit longer. But yes, so I'm really enjoying working this up so far. In terms of needle size, I'm using 5mm for the main body of the sweater, and I used either 4 or 4.5mm for the ribbing, so that's a US size 6 and 8 or 7 and 8 depending on which it was, can't remember. I think it was 4.5, so it must be in 7 and 8. But as ever, and as my wonderful friend Ellie is wont to attest, needle size is not particularly important. The main thing that is important is the gauge, and while needle size can be a really good determinant for slightly lazy people such as myself as to where you might be in the rough ballpark for getting that gauge, there's really no substitute for checking as you go. And so I have been measuring as I'm wont to do, because again, if you're a good enough person to do a swatch, if that is something that really lights your fire, more power to you. It's not for me. I am someone who I would much rather take the risk of casting on, knitting for a bit, measuring and seeing how I'm getting on, and knowing full well that I may have to rip it out and start over. I would rather throw myself headlong into something and risk getting that upset. And I know that's not the most sensible approach, but it's the one that I happen to want to stick with. So yes, I'm under no illusions that this is going to take me quite some time, so by all means I expect you'll be seeing a little bit more of it in the weeks to come. My second work in progress is also a new cast on for this week, although it is a project that I've talked about in my Vicarious knitting sections in previous weeks, and there's something about winter that has me wanting to cast on all of the hats, and in particular I've been suffering from a little bit of vicarious desire around 2 colourwork hats in particular, or rather 2 skein, 2 colourwork hats in particular. That's the word I'm going for, ish. And in particular, one of the patterns that really caught my eye is one that I cannot pronounce, and so I'm going to go with Streamsund. Words, screen, thing, here, look at that, by Donna Smith, and it's Shetland dialect. I know I'm Scottish, but it's not the same. But it's a beautiful 2-colour colourwork pattern. I picked up some yarn for it when I was in Loop a couple of weeks ago. I picked up Woolfolk Far in the colourways 02 and 04. Those colours happen to look like this. They're very pretty. So it's not quite the kind of pure white that I'm using that you see in the pattern. It is this kind of just very, very light silvery grey, and then a slightly darker, almost kind of bluey slate grey colourway, so those two are lovely together. I'm in love with this hat, not least because it is the softest yarn in the world. I think if you told me this was 100% cashmere, I would believe you in a heartbeat. It's not. It's Ovis Merino, but and it'll pill as soon as I look at it. I know it will, but oh, I love it. I love it. This is such a wonderful pattern and project to work on. If you're looking to try your first colour work, I would actually really recommend this as a great place to start. And the reason for that is the nature of this colour work pattern, if I hold it up so you can see, is there's no kind of real solid sections. Everything is kind of interspersed with the other colour. So even the kind of darker stripes that you can see here, there's actually individual stitches that are of the lighter colour the whole way through. I will hold it up here and see if that works. So as you can see, even where there are bands of kind of dark colour, there are still individual stitches of the lighter colour in between. And what that means is that actually there's no real kind of prolonged areas where you have to carry a contrast yarn. I think 5 stitches is the maximum number of stitches that you're knitting in one colour versus the other, and that means that you're kind of minimising the number of long floats that you have to carry, and really it's those long floats and kind of catching those and capturing them as you go around that tend to cause the tension issues initially as you're knitting a pattern. And so with all of that in mind, I think this is a really, really good project for a beginner colourwork knitter. It's also quite a short pattern repeat in terms of the number of rows that you have to then knit as part of one repeat, and then repeat that again and again as you go on. And so it gets quite addictive in that sense. And certainly this, I cast this on yesterday and knit it last night as I was sitting in front of the telly enjoying one of the many Christmas trashy films that happen to be on at the moment. And I got a bit addicted, and I very nearly carried on working on it into the early hours, but I stopped myself and decided it was time to go to bed. Yes, later than I still should have been, but earlier than I would have otherwise. So, you know, bonus, let's call it that. But it's just, and the yarns in combination are so deliciously soft. I'm going to hold it up and see if you might be able to see some of the halo that's coming off these, because it's insane. So here we have it here. I'm going to turn it inside out. So yes, you can see my floats, but also you can see the kind of halo that's coming off this. It is ridiculous. It's so insanely, incredibly soft. And it's going to be the coziest thing in the world to wear, I promise you. So I haven't made any modifications to this whatsoever. I'm knitting it entirely and exactly to pattern. I did use the alternating cable cast on as my cast on of choice, but other than that, I'm knitting it exactly as it is in the pattern. My only slight concern is this feels a tiny bit small, and in terms of the number of stitches to cast on, the number of stitches it asks for is a little bit fewer than I would perhaps expect from a DK weight hat pattern, which is what this is. I was mildly concerned when I put it on, but you do increase quite dramatically after the brim itself. So I thought I would stick with it. Now, I've tried to put this on my head a couple of times while it's still on the needles, which is always a risky business, and it seems fine if a little bit close fitting. I know in the pattern pictures it looks a little bit slouchier, but certainly this seems to be quite a close fitting beanie on me. I would be highly tempted to look at potentially adding in another pattern repeat if I were to knit this again. Yeah, I'm gonna see how it goes with this version that I'm working. I can't stop touching it. It's ridiculous. It's like a stress reliever. It's amazing. Yeah, I know this yarn is a little bit on the pricey side, but when you touch it and when you work with it, you will understand why. It is a chain plied yarn, which means that it is perhaps a little bit easier to split the plies accidentally, to make a small mistake and split it as you're knitting with it. And so again, if you are looking to knit this as a beginner colour knitter, maybe not the right yarn choice for your first colourwork project. It can be a little bit frustrating in that regard, but I'm using slightly blunter needles. I'm using my Haya steels, which are, unlike Haya sharps, just not quite as pointy, and I find that helps me massively when I'm using yarn that is perhaps a little bit on the splitty side, because it means that they can sort of smoothly go into the least possible resistance larger hole, as opposed to the super pointy needles, which I find for me personally tend to stab through just about anything. So tend to be more adept at kind of splitting yarn rather than perhaps going through it nice and smoothly. And so again, for me personally, these are my hat needles of choice. They have the sort of green cable that's here, I don't know how well you'll be able to see that, rather than the blue cable of the Haya sharps. But yeah, I'm anticipating I will have this done in the pretty near future, and I'm also anticipating that, assuming it fits well, I will never want to take it off, because, ugh, seriously though, ugh, it's amazing. Oh, it doesn't match my fern and feather very well though. Need to think this through. But yeah, that's it for my whips this week. As I mentioned, I've been working on a couple of others, but those are the main two. And so without any further ado, I'm going to move into my vicarious knitting. In terms of vicarious knitting, it's going to take a little bit of a slightly different view this week than it would do in normal weeks, mostly on the basis that it is the end of the year, which is traditionally a time for self-reflection, as well as a time for setting some goals and ideas around what I would like to do in the new coming year as well. And so on the subject of reflecting back, there were a couple of other things I wanted to touch on just from the Christmas period itself, which is to say, I received a couple of gift knits. I know. Now, I'm not usually someone who gets many gift knits, and that's largely because people see and understand that I have quite a lot of yarn and quite a lot of, you know, kind of knitting capacity. But my wonderful mum, who, as I've mentioned in previous weeks, is also a knitter, albeit she is someone who didn't really knit from the moment I was born up until I took an interest in it again in more recent years. She had knit a couple of bits for me for Christmas, and they're just wonderful, and so I wanted to share them here. The first of those is, she knows me so well, is this incredible gold scarf. Now this is a scarf, the pattern I've already knit actually myself in previous years. This is a pattern by Michelle Wong. It is her topiary pattern, and it is a beautiful, beautiful long scarf that is knit. In this instance, my mum has done one centered repeat. I knit this version previously. I think I knit 2 or 3 pattern repeats, so it's a much wider wrap. I think I knit 2 repeats. Years ago I knit this pattern and I loved it. But the yarn itself was an MCN, it was a merino cashmere nylon blend, and it was also in a colourway that looked very kind of pale taupey neutral, similar to the colour that I'm knitting my Lakeland pullover out of, except in certain lights it took on quite a greenish hue, which wasn't really what I was going for, so it kind of gradually fell out of favour a little bit, and I started wearing some of the other things that I'd knit instead. But nevertheless, it is a pattern and a scarf that I love. Now, scarves are commitment, as I suspect most knitters will know. It takes a lot to knit a scarf, mostly perseverance. And so it's just one pattern repeated the whole way along. And this is no exception. This is not a short scarf, and so I'm very, very grateful to my mum for having the perseverance and the persistence to knit this up. But I love this. Look. Let me put it on really, really awkwardly and have you watch me do it. It's so cozy. So yeah, it's topiary, it's by Michelle Wong, who is obviously a cabling genius, as we are all well aware, but this is one of her cable and lace combinations. The yarn that my mum used is a wonderful yarn that I adore. It's Kelbourne Woolens Scout, and this is in the Sunflower Heather colourway. My mum bought it from Tribe, which is my LYS, and I'm very grateful that Millie and Karen were able to keep the yarn a surprise. No, it's beautiful and I love it. It's such a perfect mustardy yellow colour. It's great, I love it. And I would keep this on, but she also knit me a second thing, and it's also a neck thing, and it's also amazing, and it's this. Look it! Isn't this fab? Clearly she knew kind of what was happening with my colour palette and my sensitivities at the moment, because this is also a neutral and gold. It's like she knows me, which you'd imagine she probably would. This is an incredible cowl pattern that my mum kind of modified and came up with a few different sources to put into being. It is knit in Mrs. Moon in the plump DK, and this is a single ply DK weight, and it's a mix of merino and baby alpaca. This is also stunningly beautifully soft, and yeah, it's gorgeous. In terms of the pattern, I'll put some of the details in the show notes below. I know it was a chart that my mum came across that she kind of modified. She used the stitch count from the chart to look at what the general stitch count for the full kind of round cowl should be, as well as doubling it, so she put it both in the top and on the bottom. But yeah, it's fab. Now, let me do a quick shift and swap. I mean, this is a good look, but it's not what I'm going for. It's a bit Mad Hatter's Tea Party, isn't it? On that subject, hold that thought. Ta-da! It's so cozy. So yes, this is my other Christmas gift knit. This is my little cowl, and it's deliciously cozy and soft. It's just so fluffy. Just so fluffy, and I can find bits of fluff on my face now. But no, it is beautifully, deliciously soft because it is colour work. It's even thicker and squishier and plumper, and just, it's wonderful. I really, really love it. So yes, I have to say a massive thank you to my mum, who I know happens to watch, for my two wonderful gift knits this Christmas. I say speaking of the Mad Hatter because the other gift that I received is a little bit themed to that point. So I am lucky enough to be part of a wonderful knit group that is part of, back when I lived just outside of London, I was able to get there a little bit more regularly. In more recent months I've been going a little bit less often, sadly, but they are a wonderful group of women, and each year we have our annual Christmas swap where we do a secret Santa. So we're assigned one person from within the group that we buy for, and therefore one person who is also buying for us. It's all very secretive up until the day itself, and so I was the happy and very, very lucky recipient of a fabulous handmade bag that is Alice in Wonderland themed. So you can see here it has the Mad Hatter on one side, as well as a little cheeky white rabbit who, let me just make sure that I can get him on there. So there's the white rabbit there in the corner with the Mad Hatter himself, and then on the other side is Alice along with all the different playing cards. This is a sweater size project bag that was made for me by the fabulous Margaret, who is Sewing Ruby, who has made bags that I've showed off here in previous weeks, and who we are desperately still trying to get up and running with an online shop, because she does do some project bag making for local fairs, and this bag is just, it's amazing. So it's got, move some things around inside. It's still got another part of my Christmas present in there, which is some gin. It's like they know me. But yes, it's got this beautiful, it's wonderfully lined, it's got a fabulous cord to it with a little drawstring. It's got these pockets inside, complete with a little bit of Velcro so that I can keep my things safe in there too. It also came with a little holder for some tissues, because we always joke about the fact there need to be Christmas themed tissues, and I'm terrible for always not including Christmas themed tissues in my packages. I was almost blacklisted. It was a horrible story. I don't want to get into it. But I mean, she's ridiculously talented. She is a seamstress by trade. Certainly she does a lot of work in that area and is just so talented, and I love this bag, and so I'm very, very happy about that. But not only did I receive this bag as part of my swap, I also received a wonderful skein of yarn from a UK dyer that I have been really keen to have a little look at. So this beautiful gold is from Hillview Farm, and Hillview Farm are actually really local to where my knitting swap partner and her daughter Max live. So they are out in Buckinghamshire, they're in Saunderton, and they have the farm out there as well as a farm shop and some of the yarn there. They do also do a couple of the big shows here in the UK. I know they were at Unravel this year. I think that was the first time I spotted them there. But this is beautiful. It is the Fool's Gold colourway on their 100% BFL superwash base. It is DK, and it's a really lovely yarn. So my lighting here for things in the centre is a little bit different. I'm trying to get a balance of back and foreground, but it's also dark outside, and so there's a limit to how much I can do. But certainly if I hold it here, you should be able to see the sort of colour. It's almost this beautiful kind of mazy hay gold colour. It's beautiful, and it's lovely and squishy as well, and so that will definitely be, I reckon, either a hat or perhaps some contrast colour work at some point. But yes, thank you, Margaret, this is wonderful and I really appreciate it. In terms of yarny gifts, I also received a couple of others this year. So some of these were as part of the advent calendars that I was opening, and one of them was a to me from me gift in the time-honoured tradition of knitters who give themselves yarn because no one else will do it for us. It's what happens with those people who say, oh, I didn't want to get you yarn, you've got so much of it already. And you're like, yeah, because I like it. I like yarn. Get some yourself, that's what I say. And so the main present I got for myself this year, no shame, is this incredible skein of the Yarn Badger. The Yarn Badger is a dyer that I'd seen a few posts about and around over on Instagram, in particular the Lanterns colourway, which is this. It is a self-striping yarn. At some point I will knit self-striping socks again. It will happen. Not right this second, but it is a beautiful set of colours. This yarn is her superwash BFL and nylon. It's an 80-20 blend with 400 metres, and it is just divine. So yes, the Yarn Badger is a UK based dyer who has some beautiful colourways, and I'm looking forward to seeing a few more of those in the coming year. Those of you who were following along on Vlogmas also know that I had 2 advent calendars this year that I bought. One of those was Nora George, which was the amazing, spoiler alert, gradient colourway that went all the way from grey through blue through greens and into yellows and finally into reds and some gorgeous kind of purpley burgundy colours. And the skein that she included as part of the final day of her advent calendar incorporates all of those, and it is an absolute stunner. It is speckly and beautiful. It's quite a lovely neutral base, and it incorporates those kind of lovely burgundy pinks towards the end. It's got some of the golds and the yellows. It's got the blues in there too. The colourway is Vinterfortelling, which is the winter's tale, and it is on her sock base, and it is lovely. Really love this. So beautiful yarn from Nora George there. And then the other advent calendar that I had was Cat Sandwich Fibres, and hers are such beautiful sock yarns, and the minis there include some that will micro stripe beautifully, some that are just speckled and divine, some that are a little bit more tonal, that are just the depth of colour is stunning, and the yarn that she included as part of her 25th day certainly did not disappoint. So this here is on her trusty base. It is the 75-25 merino nylon, and it is her Christmas Day colourway. Sorry, the colourway's name is Vintage Ornaments, which is perfect because look at this kind of salmony red pink colour here that goes all the way up with some of the speckles all the way through to this amazing yellow, and some of the speckles that it's divine. I love it. So certainly not disappointed with these 2 on Christmas Day. In terms of advent calendars, I've had a couple of people asking. What I would say is find some of the dyers that you know and love over on Instagram, if that is your place of choice for the general social of the networking, and follow them, because both of these dyers, I spotted that they put notes up on their Instagram to say that their advent calendars were going on sale. I want to say that Tracy of Nora George's was first, and that was maybe around about April, May time. And the reason I know that is because I hadn't moved house yet and I had to update my address with her once I had moved. So I think Tracy put hers up pretty early this year. Cat Sandwich Fibres, MJ was a little bit later, and I think hers may have been round about August, September time, worth checking. But essentially the way to find out about it, there's no kind of definite kind of determined this is the week where everyone puts out their advent calendars. It is very much as and when, and so I would say find some dyers that you know and love. By all means follow them over on Instagram. I'd advise doing that anyway, and then just keep an eye on when they're looking to post up some of their advent calendars and snag them up when you can, because it makes it such an enjoyable experience going through and opening those up on a daily basis. It's better than a chocolate advent calendar. There, I said it. So you know, it doesn't have to be either or, I'm just saying, but yeah, it just makes the advent period even more fun and enjoyable as you go along. And so those are my yarny gifts from this year. But in terms of my kind of reflection on 2018, on the year as a whole, yeah, it's been, yeah, I don't even really know where to start with it. So obviously, in terms of the podcast, and those of you who are watching who are sort of reasonably new and know me through the podcast, you've only really, I guess, kind of heard from me in recent months. And I think with that in mind, it's probably a sort of shorter version of the story to tell. But I think I mentioned all the way back in episode 1 in October time that at the start of this year, I've been going through a pretty tough time. So tail end of last year, beginning of this year was when I started going through my divorce with my now ex-husband, and I was looking for something to really kind of help me lay out where I wanted to be in 2018. I used that breakup as an opportunity to kind of reset quite a few things in my life and start to think about what the kind of path and the situation was that I wanted to create for myself. And in doing so, I was able to think about some of the things I wanted to do along the way. So in particular, kind of yarn festivals were really big ones for me. I know I wanted to head to EYF for the first time, to the Edinburgh Yarn Festival, hilariously, which is my hometown. You'd imagine I might have gone in the previous 4 years, but no. The 5th year of EYS was the first time that I went along, and I adored that. But the really big one for me was that I wanted 2018 to be the year of my first trip to Rhinebeck, and it was incredible. And it was incredible for so many reasons, and I'm not going to gush about every single one of them here because there is a 2-hour episode that does that for me. but certainly just to touch on the fact that, one, I was able to go meet up with friends that I've been speaking to online for 8 or 9 years and never thought I'd necessarily have an opportunity to meet. I got to meet some of them, and that was incredible. I had a chance to go and see and experience kind of dyers and a yarn show that I'd only ever heard about and seen pictures of, and the atmosphere and just the joy of that experience was another that really just continues to make me smile every time I think of some of those memories. And then the third layer of that was bringing the podcast into it, which was, I was literally a couple of weeks into that podcast. I posted episode 3 immediately before I flew. I posted episode 4 while I was out there that I'd recorded beforehand. I was incredibly new, and yet there were still people out there who knew me, who wanted to say hello, who were happily accepting of my hugs and general kind of word vomit in their direction. That isn't meant to sound quite as gross as it did. Just the fact that I can't control the words that sometimes come out of my mouth. And so it was such a delight and kind of an extra dimension to the whole experience to bring that to bear. And so I had talked about 2018 as the year of being brave, and brave was my word of choice for the year, where I wanted to kind of go forward and embrace things that perhaps seemed a little bit scary, whether those be festivals, whether it be different paths, whether it be moving back to a city on my own for the first time in many, many years. And I'm pretty happy to say that I've ticked those boxes. And for me, having an idea of a word of a year feels far more kind of appropriate, far more manageable, far more helpful, essentially, than having resolutions. I'm someone who, you know, if I looked back, I probably have the same resolutions every year, year after year, and they are your old hackneyed ones of be fitter, be healthier, lose weight. And they're all very kind of, you know, kind of numbers based and very kind of based on how I look as an individual and not necessarily based on everything that makes up me. Whereas having a word, having something that drives you forward, you can choose to interpret it in different ways. And yeah, it's not quite as absolute, but on the plus side, it's not quite as absolute. It gives you a little bit more leeway and a little bit more flexibility, but it also means that on the days when you really just need to take it easy, sometimes being brave and just living up to that word has a far different set of kind of criteria or ramifications as it would do on a day when you're feeling very gung-ho and very ready to take on just about anything. So it works for me. And so when it came to thinking about 2019 and the word that I wanted to choose there, I did a little bit of self-reflection and I thought about what are some of the things that I want to take forward versus what are some of the things that still need a little bit of polishing. And so in particular, I was thinking about some of the positives that I want to take from this year. So I definitely want to continue to take on this kind of mentality of pushing forward, of forging new things, of being brave and continuing to kind of strive and direct a lot of my focus and attention and energy. I've created a whole new word. The word is not attenergy, but I quite like no, attention and energy on driving things forward. But there's a few things that I need to pick up on as well. So I'm someone who I can be a little bit distracted. I can procrastinate. I can, you know, kind of be a little bit self-indulgent with my time. I think as someone who is, or for a long time has been part of a couple who's used to then kind of sharing time in that experience, who then goes to being on their own, it's only kind of natural to sink into ways that kind of go, oh, I've got all this time and I can do whatever I want with it, and that's amazing. And I'm definitely not kind of knocking that in whatever way, but I do think my tendency has been, particularly this year, to be a little bit easy on myself and to not necessarily do and push myself to do some of the harder things or some of the more adult responsible things that I otherwise really need to do. And so part of what I want to do in this next year is going to be focusing on some of the things that need to get done as well as the things that I want to get done, because if there is one really big learning that I'm taking from this year, it is that self-care is about more than just being self-indulgent. And I'm definitely a little bit guilty of some of the self-indulgence sometimes in a myriad of different ways, not least of which is the procrastination and kind of not necessarily putting things that need to get done right at the top of the to-do list. And so when it comes to next year, that's where I know I want to make a fairly significant change. And so with all of that in mind, the word that I've really kind of come to for 2019 that's kind of crystallizing a lot of what I want to do there, the word is purposeful. And that encapsulates a few different things. It definitely encapsulates this idea around prioritization, looking at all the things that need to be done and calling out the ones that are the most urgent. It calls out this piece around commitment. So actually then doing things and seeing them through once I've called them out as key priorities, and being persistent in all of those as well, and actually driving through in spite of the various different distractions or objections or kind of anything that I may come up against as part of going through it, and not getting too kind of sidelined and falling into something else. It helps me a little bit with that procrastination. It helps me a little bit with the kind of hedonistic distracting tendencies of, oh, let's go and look over here because this looks far more inviting and a little bit comfier, and oh, there's cake. And so I know that these are things that I want to try and just be, I'm not kind of cancelling them out altogether. I'm definitely not an all or nothing kind of person, but I do know that I need something to give me a little bit of kick in the right direction away from my tendencies to be rather comfortable as it stands. And so I'm calling all of this out, but there is one thing that I want to touch on in particular, which is I am not yet sure how much I need or want this to apply to my knitting and my crafting. It definitely applies to the podcast in the sense of actually getting it up and running and carving out time to do that, because this is something I know I want to prioritise in the coming year. But in terms of specific projects, in terms of whips, in terms of kind of seeing through everything I cast on and being very rigid and that structure, I don't know, and the reason for that is I'm still figuring out the extent to which I am an all or nothing sort of person, or someone who needs a little bit of a space in which to kind of go crazy, go rogue, to do all of these things in order to help me stay on track the rest of the time. Now, it sounds a little bit ridiculous that I'm 35 and I haven't figured this out yet, and yet I don't know that there's many of us that absolutely know ourselves that well. So for me, I think, yeah, it's the bit that I still need to figure out, which is to say that I think there's probably a fine balance between the two. I definitely know that if I am trying to be a little bit better about a lot of these things in kind of general everyday life, and not being quite so distracted, that I do need a little bit of an outlet. Otherwise I will just combust. And so perhaps knitting, when it comes to casting on projects and not giving myself too hard a time about the number of whips that I have, I don't anyway, or the kind of nature of the projects that I'm casting on and how quickly I'm finishing them, that's probably an area where there's going to be a fair bit of leeway that's still left. However, I do believe that I can't go completely crazy in that sense, because I think there's almost a bit of there's a kind of article that I was reading recently that was talking a little bit about the kind of finite amount of time or energy is probably the closest word that comes to it, but essentially kind of power, if you like, that you have when it comes to making decisions. So on a daily basis, we make a huge number of decisions. Some of those are massive and all-encompassing decisions. Some of them are just, you know, kind of what kind of coffee am I going to have today? Where am I going to buy that coffee? How far do I know I want to walk to get that coffee? They're sort of smaller, more instinctive decisions that we can make fairly easily. But this article was talking about having a finite amount of kind of power, attention, energy, whatever you want to call it, in making those decisions, such that when we get to the end of the day, if we've been making an awful lot of those, it's really hard to make a decision. I'm definitely guilty of this. Definitely. There are days when I feel drained and I have no idea what I want anymore by the end of it. So when it comes to deciding what I want for dinner, oh lordy, it's nigh on impossible. But what's interesting is I think this works the other way as well, which is to say that if I'm in a space where I am, you know, kind of full wild abandoning everything in my knitting life, in my kind of creative sphere, if I am just letting loose over there, I do think there's an extent to which that might seep a little bit into other areas of my life. And so what I need is to find that balance between sticking to the rules a little bit, still being guided by those, but perhaps not necessarily being rigid in that sphere. Does that make sense? It kind of makes sense in my head. I'm not really sure about wavelengths and stuff, but I reckon there's probably a few of you out there that understand where I'm coming from on this. So essentially, I have a word purposeful. That purposeful is going to guide me. That word is going to guide me in 2019 in terms of hopefully narrowing down a little bit of some of the traits or some of the characteristics that I feel perhaps waste a little bit of my time, that make me a little bit less effective than I would like to be, and help me to really prioritise some of the things that need done, and help me to feel better and do better all the while. At the same time, I don't necessarily anticipate this is going to change too much of the kind of content or my general way of being on the podcast, but hopefully it will help me to be a little bit more efficient around the sidelines. That was a bit of a ranty stream of consciousness for you there, sorry about that. But yeah, in terms of the word of the year, I find it really helpful. I'm conscious it's probably not for everyone, but if you do decide to choose a word for the year, I highly recommend that you do it. And you know, brave has worked really well for me this year. It's something that has helped me to kind of frame and think of a lot of different things that are out there. But I appreciate resolutions may work just as well for you. So whatever you choose, more power to you. And here's to achieving all of the things that you want in 2019. A slightly different vicarious knitting section from me this week. I assure you that next week will return to normal as I post up. I will remember as well to put up a new show me your vicarious knits for January thread over in the group, so that any new patterns, anything that's caught your eye, you can pop those in over on there as well. And I'll be sharing some of mine in next week's podcast. But in the meantime, the last section of this week's podcast really just allows for me to showcase some of the amazing knit along projects projects that you have been working on in the last week or so as part of our Blamed Underknit Along, where of course you have the opportunity to cast on anything and work on anything that you really want to work on. And so for some of you with gift knits out the way, this gives you ample time and opportunity to do it. For those of you for whom gift knits were the absolute pinnacle of what you wanted, then you can enter those as well, of course. But I know certainly for me, this knit along has been around, you know, kind of enabling a little bit more of a selfish knit, if I do say so myself. But that doesn't mean it has to be the same and true for you. So what I'm going to do this week is I will showcase some of the projects that have caught my eye over in the Ravelry groups. We do take it alternate weeks, so previously it was Instagram, this week is Ravelry, so I'll be sharing some of the projects that have caught my eye both in the FO threads and the chatter threads. So I invite you to take a look at our Blamed Underknit Along gallery. They're stupendous, aren't they? It's ridiculous. And so now I just have a exponentially growing queue and list of things that I know I want to knit, and hopefully the same is true of you as well. So I've mentioned in previous weeks that if you are getting a little bit overwhelmed with the chatter thread in particular and just want to keep an eye on some of the projects that are out there, if you look at the Ravelry group thread, if you go into that, look right at the top of the screen and you should be able to see on the Ravelry page there are a number of different links, one of which is a number that is underlined with images next to it. So this will then, if you click on that link, it'll bring up all of the posts that have pictures attached to them, and it's certainly what I like to do if I find a thread is just going a little bit too fast for me. I can't keep up with all the chat, but I do want to make sure that I'm not missing out on any of the pretties. That is how I tend to kind of keep an eye on there. But certainly it's a thread that is moving very quickly. I do struggle to keep up with it, I'm not going to lie, but I'm delighted to see that everyone in there seems to be so happy and engaged with the cal and everything else that everyone else is making. And so that is it for this week's podcast, and indeed that's it for this year. That sounds really weird to be saying that. I really wasn't anticipating when I started this podcast back in October that I would be speaking to quite so many of you on quite such a regular basis. It is wonderful, and I cannot possibly begin to express how grateful I am, how pleased I am at those of you who seem to be enjoying the podcast, who come back on a regular basis and listen to me and my ramblings and my occasional swearing. I haven't done much swearing this week. Oh, I feel like the night before Stitchmas kind of made up for that. So if you're feeling that you missed out, feel free to go back and check that. But yes, so I'm so grateful to all of you for subscribing, for following along, for reaching out and speaking to me, whether it be on Ravelry, on Instagram. It has been an absolute delight, and I'm looking forward to plenty more of the same and more in the coming year. As ever, you can find us over on Ravelry in the Knitting Vicariously group. The show notes for that, as well as all links, will of course be in the description box below. And similarly, do feel free to continue to follow along with us over on Instagram using the hashtag of your choice. So for all things Cal related, the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG tag is your best friend there. But then for everything else that is more generally podcast related, feel free to use the Knitting Vicariously hashtag for that as well. And so it only really remains for me to wish you a very happy rest of day, rest of week, rest of year. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, and if for whatever reason it isn't, I hope you have a chance to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on. Enjoy a cheeky tipple at midnight on the eve of 2019, and I look forward to speaking to you in the new year. Have a good one. Bye. Here we are, kind of part way in between Christmas and New Year. No one really knows what day it is, what's going on. There's a lot of grazing that's happening in the house. Everyone's blood alcohol levels are reasonably constantly elevated, shall we say. It's the forgotten days of Twixtmas, and so it's just I quite like that. That's quite a good name for a song. Forgotten. It's like the 12 days of Christmas, but that no man's land period in between. So I like this. Let's run with it. So we've got like, there's no pipers piping, there's no swan swimming, there's kind of like, you know, kind of endless cheese. There's, you know, kind of not knowing what day it is. That seems to be pretty prevalent at the moment. I think this is Friday? Yep, this is Friday. That was a lucky guess. You've got your kind of constant stream of visitors that you have no idea when they're coming. You've got the constant Christmas sales and the festive telly. You've got the films on the festive telly, the films and the series of films that exist, and then the series of those films that we ignore. Case in point, Die Hard 1, 2, 3, yes. 4 and 5, they're like the kind of unspoken bits of the family that don't really get invited to stuff. That's 4 and 5. I feel like there might even be a 6 coming, and that's just terrifying. Similarly, Indiana Jones. 1, 2, 3, all good. 4, don't talk of it, never speak of it, it doesn't exist. I love Cate Blanchett, don't get me wrong, but no. Quintessentially, Home Alone. Only Home Alone 1 and 2 exist. None other than that were ever made, and if you disagree with me on that, there's going to be a problem. So where does that leave us? On the forgotten days of Twixtmas my true love gave to me, constant Christmas sales on the festive telly, visitors on Friday. Wait, what day is Friday? I thought today was Thursday, but yesterday was Tuesday. Never-ending cheese. Forgotten presents. See what I did there? 3 Die Hards, 2 Home Alones. And I wish you a happy new year. Have a good one, Pickles.